A BYU protest took place this week, part of a national protest at religious educational institutions fighting against the exemption given to them under Title IX. This national walkout, this national protest was put together by two different organizations, one of them started by BYU students. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson. I'm your host. This episode is brought to you by Cardio Miracle. Go to cwicmedia.com, cwicmedia.com to find out why I take this supplement every single day. All right, so this week there was a protest south of campus put on by two different organizations. One of them is called REAP, or the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, a national organization, and the other is by the Black Menaces. Some of you may know who the Black Menaces are. They're very popular on social media, have a huge following on TikTok, and they are a handful of individuals that go around starting off at BYU campus, trying to make students very uncomfortable about questions on race and LGBTQ issues, etc. They got a lot of response on this, a lot of support, and that moved on a little bit more into critiquing the church, the brethren, priesthood, you name it, right? They're going after the church also in these interviews. Well, this now has obviously led to something much bigger. They have formed a national organization where the Black Menaces are on campuses nationwide. And one thing they're involved with here is putting together this national walkout at universities that are sponsored by a religious institution. Their goal is to get rid of the religious exemptions under Title IX, right? This allows religions to be able to enforce their doctrine, their belief systems at their educational institutional campuses. Without the exemption, BYU could not be BYU. They could not have their honor code, not as it is. You would not be able to separate the sexes for dorms. There'd be a lot of issues here that would go very much against a church-sponsored school, at least the way the church wants BYU to be. Very difficult waters to navigate through, but let's go to an article that talks just a little bit more about this protest and what's happening, because there are many layers under this that are very important. They go directly to President Oak's devotional just a few weeks ago, held at BYU campus, where he talked about Title IX. It also goes to the strong emphasis by several of the apostles on religious freedom. This is actually the attack that is being made by these BYU students and these organizations. It is against religious freedom. But let's go to the article. So this article is put out by The Hill. I want to go into just a couple of points here on this article to give you a broad idea of exactly what's happening here. It says, students at religious schools across the country walked out of class Tuesday to demand widespread changes be made to how LGBTQ people are treated at religious universities and high schools. Tuesday's walkouts at more than 50 schools were organized by the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, REAP, and the Black Menaces. This is the BYU group. These are BYU students, members of the church, I'm pretty sure. A group of 5 black students at Brigham Young University whose viral TikTok videos show their mostly white peers often struggling to answer questions about race and identity. This would be LGBTQ issues, right? I'm not going to go into that. We'll talk about that maybe some other time. The Black Menaces said that this walkout is happening at over 50 schools nationwide, and they say that the walkouts were organized to end legal discrimination. So they're saying that these Title IX exemptions that are given to religious institutions are legal discrimination. There's some truth to that, right? There is some truth to that. There's some legal discrimination based on beliefs. For example, with Latter-day Saints and most of Christianity, they don't believe in homosexual behavior. right? That's something they're going to support on campus. They're not telling other institutions how to handle themselves. They're not telling them what they should do in terms of LGBTQ behaviors or anything else, right? They're just talking about their own owned school, BYU. They're following their own doctrine. But this is what is coming to a head. We're not even close to where this is going to go. We're not even close to where this is going to go, right? You've got Identitarianism, which is a religion. It is a religion, right? When you have the religion of the gospel of equity and liberation, right? That is moving you forward in progress, air quotes, then that religion takes precedence over your own religion and your own doctrine and your own religion. That's the way it always is going to work. That's why these two things are incompatible. You can't have the doctrine and the crux of the gospel of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints with an agenda to overthrow the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This will come to a head. It's not close to getting there yet, but it is moving pretty fast. Let's go back to the article. You have here another local group here at BYU called USGA, the Understanding Sexuality, Gender, and Allyship group. They are an unofficial LGBTQ student group on BYU campus. I'm not sure how that works. They're an unofficial LGBTQ student group on BYU campus. Maybe someone can put in the comments or contact me and tell me how that works or what that is. But they're seen leading a group of a chant of 2468, stop exemptions, stop the hate. So again, I mean, that's we you know how Latter-day Saints that we believe based on scripture, right? That they're and this comes from a few different places in scripture, but we believe in being a peculiar people. And there's some, satisfaction in feeling that way and wanting to be different from the world. But what do you do when peculiar is turned on its head and it becomes hate, right? It becomes homophobia. It becomes transphobia. It becomes racist, right? Because that is what is happening right now. That is, the culture is going to move your peculiarity into those areas. That is the great and spacious building. How do you react to this? What are you going to do? And again, I'm full support of people having their own agency and how they want to choose to live their lives. And that's very important to me. Go have your agency. I may not believe in what you do, but agency is crucial here. But you have a choice as to where you want to go to school. Do you remember when this whole thing, many of you that are older listeners here, do you remember when this whole thing was about tolerance, yesterday? We just want tolerance on this. And there was need for that. I mean, it's true. There was a very great need, honestly, for tolerating and making sure that we put our arms around and offering charity to those that feel different and those that have different desires and those that are experiencing things that in a very difficult environment, which is in the church. It's a difficult environment for them to bring these things together, right? That has to be understood. But this is no longer about tolerance. And if you've read any of the works of those that have really been behind this from the beginning, right? If you really go back and follow the DNA of running up through Hegel and Marx and Engels and the Frankfurt School, Marcuse and Foucault and Derrida and Angela Davis and now with Ibram Kendi, it's all the same thing, right? It's all about liberation. And it's always been about sexual revolution, a sexual liberation. That's always been a part of it, going all the way back. Go to Marx. Very much, it's about sexual liberation. What's interesting, actually, in this article with The Hill, in their article, they've got this photo here of the U.S. flag, and then they've got a pride flag waving next to it, right? And which there's an awful lot of conflict there. Not by me, but by those that push a certain agenda against the Constitution. Going with freedom of religion is just the first step on this. There is a real goal behind a lot of this liberation that goes against the Constitution. But look what it says here, if you can see this, what it says here at the bottom of this photo, which is from the AP, right, the Associated Press. It's an explanation of the photo. It says the rainbow flag, an international symbol of LGBTQ liberation. Right? In other words, it's not tolerate me, it's change everything around me, right, to suit what I want. It's not, live and let live. Right? They're certainly not doing that with religion. Right? That's what we were told originally 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why do you care about this? Just let people live the way they want to. Okay, for me, being a classical liberal, I agree with that. But see, now it's doing what the founders of this line of thinking, of critical social justice, of critical theory, and beyond, have designed their philosophy around the whole time. It's the idea of this liberation, which requires that we change all of these systems. You talk about systemic racism, systemic homophobia, all of these things. What it means is all institutions need to be broken down and changed so that there is this liberation. The shackles can be removed. And everything, every corner of every institution has to follow this. And instead of saying we need to tolerate and love and give charity, which is the right answer, it's you better change or else we are coming after you. And it doesn't matter that there is choice. You must change. It doesn't matter that we can go to different universities. It doesn't matter that there is no rights or civil rights, that you must go to college and that you must go to this college. No, everything must change. Everything must turn on its head. Liberation requires massive systemic change. Now, let's get back to this article here at The Hill. It says Title IX, which prohibits educational institutions that receive government funding from discriminating based on sex, which originally it was based on the sexes, then it has broadened out into all of the LGBTQ issues, does not apply to colleges or universities controlled by a religious organization. Right? To the extent that application of Title IX would be inconsistent with the religious tenets of the organization. Right? This is according to the Department of Education guidelines. This is what the protest is about. It goes on. BYU, operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is one of 40 religious universities with students that are suing the Education Department, should be the Department of Education, for allowing them to sidestep protections guaranteed to LGBTQ students under Title IX. In other words, if it wasn't a religious institution, if the exemptions weren't there, right, then BYU would be breaking Title IX according to the government. And what would that mean? Here's the key in understanding this. What exactly would this mean if BYU if the religious exemptions were removed? Well, what it would mean is because there is funding from the government, right? Because there is funding from the government, that's what requires you to follow Title IX. Well, how big a deal is that? Well, look at how our culture has moved from let's save up for college. Let's go out and work for a few years and save up for college. Or, hey, our parents will help you take care of this, to the point that we have such a mass exodus from this is another issue, but a mass exodus from the nest of home for 18-year-olds and high school graduates to universities, especially living away from home, that what has to happen is you have Pell Grants, you have student loans, right, that are in place, that this makes the government in charge of you following Title IX, right? The other thing is things for, to make for research, right? It would also hurt BYU for the research grants that are given by the federal government if they lost the exemption. All of that money would be taken away. But the mass of the financial change that would happen with the students. It's with their loans and the Pell Grants. So you would no longer, applying to BYU, be able to apply for a student loan. You would not be able to apply for a Pell Grant if BYU was out of step with Title IX, unless they have the religious exemption, which they do currently. So actually removing, two things I want to say on this, removing the exemption and not changing, which I do not think BYU is going to do, and not changing would then, of course, require all students who go to BYU to do so without federally assisted funds. So it's going to greatly damage the quite frankly, easy ability to get financial assistance to go to college at Brigham Young University. Now, having said that, I'm a proponent of getting rid of it anyway. It's not nearly as expensive as other good universities because of the church's support already with this. And, maybe the church could put something together where they can at least cover part of it, or there can be some loans that's put out for students. I don't know. Additional scholarships and different things that maybe could be done from the church. But I don't see, first of all, I think it is for college, whether it's a religious institution or not, the amount of kids that are going to college right now, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. A lot of them are coming out with ridiculous degrees that don't do anything in furthering their productivity and career in the future. So many of them are now being indoctrinated into the religion of academia while they're there. The expense for most universities everywhere is absolutely outrageous, which is just, you've got parents that are, putting massive second mortgages on their homes, or depleting their savings, their retirement, to cover this, to have their kids come back indoctrinated into the religion of academia and the gospel of equity. Now, I'm all for education, but education has changed immensely in the U.S. in the last 30 years. As critical social justice, which was basically previously just called Marxism, used to be in the fringes in the social sciences departments, and a little bit in the humanities in the 60s and 70s. Now it has grown to infiltrate almost every department, well, all departments to some degree. And there's really no check and balance outside of religious institutions against this. Now, back to the article here. I just want to get to this last paragraph. Students in the class action lawsuit filed last year by REAP, that's the Religious Exemption Accountability Project, claimed that religious exemptions to Title IX have created legal avenues. Well, their claim is true. Right, legal avenues for schools to discriminate against LGBTQ students. Of course, it depends on what you mean by LGBTQ or by discrimination. Department of Justice attorneys have said that while the law will be defended in court, it is also under review by the Department of Education. Well, look, this is going to get more and more steam behind it. They put a class action lawsuit together early, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, but it failed. But they're still going after it. They're still going after this with different avenues at the state level, at the federal level. They want to change the religious exemption. And here's the thing, right? Here's what I would ask of someone like an organization like the Black Menaces is, okay, then what? Right? Let's say that you and this other organization, REAP, and every other supporter of getting rid of the federal exemptions for religious institutions and their educational campuses, let's say it works, right? Then what? Right? Well, if BYU doesn't change, it's not like I'm guessing you're going to stop, right? That's not where it stops. See, the only way the protests and the desire for change stops, and even then it doesn't stop, but is if BYU goes against the church values and doctrines and belief systems and changes everything according to your beliefs. Even though there are 5,000 colleges out there that you can choose from to go to, for whatever reason, BYU and these other religious institutions must change. Religious beliefs or not. And then what, right? And then when does it go directly to Salt Lake? When do the protests go directly to Salt Lake and the organizations get together and say, okay, well, we've gone to the education campuses now. Now let's go directly to the churches. And if they don't change their doctrine, if they don't change their, if they don't support, marrying same-sex couples or trans couples or whatever it might be, then we want the federal exemption removed from them as a religious institution. I mean, isn't that the natural next step to go to? Well, I think most people can assume, and probably already do, that that's coming pretty soon. And again, even if the church were to lose its exemption from its protected status as a religious institution for taxes and other things, and they stuck to their doctrine and their belief systems, it's not going to stop, right? It still doesn't stop. Everything must change for liberation. Everything. And even if it were to change, which it never will, right? Even if it were to change, it wouldn't be enough. Because then it's, well, how many individuals of a certain race are in the 70? How many are in the quorum of the 12? How many are in the first presidency? And then the protests go toward that. And how many LGBTQ members are speaking in general conference? How many stake presidents are there? How many, when are women going to be stake presidents? When are women going to hold the priesthood? All of those things will never stop. This is not about a single thing. That's the whole thing with the gospel of equity and with liberation. It can never stop. There are always places to look for more problems. And there's always places to look to find problems that are out there and not personally with you. And then, of course, as I've said, and I'm doing a couple more episodes on this coming up here very quickly here on liberation theology, this is where this is all going to lead. It's going to lead to these changes that many critics of the church, both non-members and members of the church, are going to keep lancing at the church and throwing accusations at the church. But ultimately, it's going to end up at the core of the gospel, at the plan of salvation. And that is the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ. It's going to end up with liberation theology. It's happening with other Christian sects. It's going to happen in the church, where this push is going to come pretty strongly. and it's going to come from academia. All right, let's go to the REAP webpage. This is the Religious Exemption Accountability Project. I want to read to you about this lawsuit that they are continually trying to push here federally against the religious educational institutions. Here's what it says here. Religious exemptions to civil rights statutes come at a price. The price is paid by the young and vulnerable who find themselves at the mercy of religiously affiliated, taxpayer-funded social services and educational institutions that often turn them away or force them into the closet. I mean, this could be said, if you're using that approach, I mean, that could be said for the religion as a whole. And I'm sure those at REAP and probably the Black Menaces, I don't want to put words in their mouth, and other similar organizations would agree with that. REAP's lawsuit asserts the constitutional and basic human rights of LGBTQ plus students seeking to end the sexual, physical, and psychological abuses perpetrated under the religious exemption to Title IX at thousands of federally funded schools, colleges, and universities across America. Okay, again, it's very simple there, right? No more exemptions for religions. You follow what has been pushed by Title IX. It is the state over religion. Where is the separation of church and state here? How do you resolve this conflict? Who bends? Does BYU bend? Do other religious institutions bend on this? Change their doctrine? Change their policies and their belief systems on their universities and eventually within their church itself? Well, I can tell you right now, the other side is not going to bend on this. The next paragraph here says, the Constitution guarantees equal rights for all Americans, holding space for religious belief and practice, while ensuring that religion does not serve as a government-funded vehicle to harm racial, ethnic, gender, sexual, religious, or other minorities. Government action that ignores this central principle, including the religious exemption to Title IX, is unconstitutional. There is that First Amendment. Is unconstitutional and must be remedied immediately. Okay, so I wouldn't say it's unconstitutional, but it's definitely a part of Title IX. You know, that Title IX holds that if you want anything that is federally funded, you have to follow Title IX. And that certainly, I would imagine, could get around the Constitution. I don't think that, I'm not a legal expert on this, but that is, you don't have to have government funding for a university. There's no guarantee or a right for that. Just like there is not a guarantee or a right for you to go to a certain university or to go to a university and have them create their policies and procedures based on what you want them to do. There are 5,000 colleges. Pick one that works for you. Now, what's interesting is that just a few weeks ago, President Oaks gave a BYU devotional. And in that devotional, knowing that these things are percolating and that this protest was likely coming, he talked about Title IX. And he actually had a direct involvement in Title IX in making changes. And those changes were along the lines of the religious exemption for these institutions. And the Department of Education went along with what President Oaks then was covering, was admonishing and advocating so that religious institutions could work within their own belief systems and within their own doctrine. And that's not just for the hierarchy. It's not just for those at the top of the church, so to speak, the prophet and the brethren, right? It's for the members of the church. It's usually looked at like, well, they're the oppressors, those that are critiquing this. And, as you hear sometimes, like I've heard from several BYU students, we're not going to listen to a bunch of white men or even dead white men. It's always turned into an oppressor versus victim. It's always conflict theory. But what about all of the other students that want to go to BYU and follow the prophet and follow the doctrine of the church and be in an environment where you don't have men and women in the same dorms and as roommates or whatever it might be. So I think it's well known by the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, exactly what's going on. And you see this push with freedom of religion. They're very concerned about this. And here it's happening from an organization founded by members of the church and BYU students that are protesting against this exact thing that the church is trying to uphold. And they're doing it on a national basis. Now, one last thing on this that is very interesting, and this is really shame on BYU for this. There was an event that was planned by a group, a BYU group of students. They're called the BYU Conservatives. And what they wanted to do is that during the protest, while the protest was going on, they were going to have a flash mob. You know what a flash mob is, right? Everybody, hey, here we go. They text each other or put it out on an app, and then they all come together. And this was going to be in the Wilkinson Center. And they were going to do the atrocious act of singing hymns. No chants, no signs. They were going to sing hymns. Well, BYU administration got wind of this, that they were going to start singing hymns. And the general counsel for BYU sent an email, basically a threat, to this group of students and told them that they couldn't do it, that it was not approved. It wasn't an approved event. It's not really even an event, right? They're going to get together to sing hymns. But they didn't want this happening, which is absolutely selective execution of their honor code policies for demonstrations and gatherings, etc. I mean, they certainly allowed the Y to get lit up, even though they had police officers there to stop it. They allowed it to go forward. But hey, some kids want to get together and simply sing hymns during the time that this protest is going on. BYU will have nothing to do with it. They are not going to have you singing the Spirit of God or Come, Come Ye Saints on campus in the Wilkinson Center. Not going to happen. This is shameful. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to give you just a couple of excerpts from the email that was sent to the BYU Conservatives about this flash mob hymn singing, this horrible thing that was going to be happening in the quad at the Wilkinson Center. General counsel at BYU stated this: recently we learned of a proposed unauthorized flash mob that your group, known as BYU Conservatives, is planning on the BYU campus today in the Wilkinson Student Center. I am writing to ask that you not hold this event, which would be in violation of BYU policy. And then he goes on and says this. He says, please note that BYU does not want to shut down positive, compliant efforts to support BYU or your freedom of speech in public fora. This request has nothing to do with your political beliefs or message. Okay, that's not true. That's not true. And there's a great response here from one of the founders of this group, the BYU Conservatives, Luke Hansen. This is what he says back to the general counsel of BYU. He says, I can't help but notice many other groups on campus do not appear to have been held to such a high standard as we are. First, there have been multiple rainbow days at BYU that have been well publicized in advance and included not only wearing certain symbols and colors, but also a gathering in the quad. There was, of course, the daily chalking of BYU property following Elder Holland's remarks last year. You remember that. And then, of course, he's got the 2 times that the Y was lit. Then he says this, and I think that this is important. I am not accusing you personally of malice or double standard, but I hope you could see why I might suspect the BYU bureaucracy needs to rethink its strategy. My intimate experience with BYU's response to the Duke volleyball debacle leads me to believe BYU has adopted a squeaky wheel gets the grease approach to enforcing their policies and dealing with controversy. I don't think that there's any way you can say anything different than that. That's exactly what it is. What will the ramifications be if we stop this group over here as opposed to this group over here? I mean, how ironic is it, right? You've got the bell tower there on campus at BYU that rings out, "Come, come, ye saints." And these students want to get together to sing a few hymns. Seriously, that's all. They're going to sing a few hymns together. You can't do that. And that's what they're going to choose to stop. That's where they're putting their foot down. I say shame on BYU there. That's really too bad. Once again, though, we see that the campuses of the United States are where all of these things are sprouting from. This is the hotbed of cultural change. It is built upon the backs of the professors and administrators over the decades that were firmly in the Marxian camp and now have added in postmodernism and identitarianism and view everything through a lens of critical theory, including the church, which must create a power structure and differential and go after whoever has power. That's what critical theory does. It is a Marxian, the chassis that critical theory and critical social justice are built on is Marxism. It is no different. It's just got different names. It's got a different face. It presents itself differently. It's the same thing. Break down the current systems, break down authority, and make sure that everyone has full liberation for your sexuality, for your identity, liberation from family, liberation from anything that might hold you back from you being you. That's really what this is all about. Thanks for listening.